What's good, party people? This is According to Woods, and I have the honor and privilege of having the fighting pride of the Pacific Northwest. He is one, Gabe Wishon. Gabe, how are you doing, my man?
Doing all right, Adam, man. It's good to be here. Good to have a talk.
Dude, an honor and a privilege. One of the main things that I find absolutely intriguing is, your military service. And your MOS during your service time. Of course, you're a fighter now, but can we start off with that? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, I got out of high school. I lived in a really small town. Not a lot going on when you're a young guy. So the best option for me, I wanted to join the Navy and travel and see the world and see where all I'd get stationed. So I joined, and I ended up going in as a nuclear operator. So after about 2.5, 3 years of school, I went to my first ship stationed out in Japan, actually. And I got to be a machinist mate on a nuclear carrier, running two nuclear power plants. And that's kind of my military background. I did 6 total years, almost 4 on the ship out in Japan. Didn't come back to America the whole time. So it was pretty fun. Yeah, we got to travel. I hit 15 different countries while I was there and really got to see the world.
And that's brilliant. That's so brilliant. To have, especially as a young man, that type of life experience. Josh Barnett, who on his last appearance on Rogan, he was talking about, the fighters that he trains. He essentially, likes to take them out of their comfort zone and whatever, and like have them take a fight in Japan, have them take a fight in Singapore, just so they can figure out like what the world is really like
Oh, yeah.
outside of their kind of Southern California upbringing.
Yeah, that'd be super cool to fight for 1FC over there in Asia. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Oh man, it's funny. And I got goosebumps here because that's one of my favorite promotions. And I actually did like when they were kind of making their North American expansion. Um, there was a press event here in LA, and it was like right after they signed like Mighty Mouse and Eddie Alvarez. So like you're in kind of like a presser, and you've got like Eddie Alvarez, Bellator and UFC champion. You've got Mighty Mouse, arguably one of the greatest flyweights to ever step into the cage
Oh,
and
yeah.
hail from your area.
Oh, yeah, he's local.
Um,
He's been at some of the amateur fights even I've been on there as coaching, and he's been in a cornerman, so it's pretty cool. We have a great community here in the Northwest for fighting.
that's awesome, and I definitely. But that would be great if you Chatri Sitnatong is obviously an ardent mixed martial artist himself, and he really honors the development of each fighter's martial arts background, and he highlights that you get good fights, not so much like crazy trash talk. And not to say that crazy trash talk doesn't exist there, because it does, and it does in every promotion, but it's awesome to know that you could sell an arena full of people and pay-per-views on
Yeah,
just two good fighters, two great
yeah,
fighters
yeah.
at their peak.
That's fun. Yeah, for sure.
Now, obviously, growing up in a small town and then going out to Japan and seeing that there's 16 other countries, um, I guess what was your mindset before, and then in terms of what you ended up coming out of when you left?
There was a little anxiety, but I had a few years in school where I went and lived in New York and South Carolina, spent a couple months in Great Lakes. And so, I mean, there was a transition before I went straight to Tokyo from small town USA, right? So I was ready for it, but of course, it's the biggest city in the world. So there's a lot to think about going into that. It's very, very different from growing up out in coastal Washington. With 3,000 people in my hometown, my ship had 5,000. So, I mean, my ship has a bigger population than where I come from. So,
Wow, that's amazing, right? Literally, plucked from that small town, and then bam, there's 2,000 more people on your ship traveling to the biggest city in the world,
yeah,
you know, than in your town that you grew up in, and you basically it raised you.
for sure. Yeah. I mean, and that's a great opportunity for anyone who has the chance to do it, be able to move out and then truly get a taste of the world and experience other cultures and really get to see so much more than may otherwise be available. So
that is so incredible. Now, I mean that MOS, the job that you had, that I mean, you don't really hear too much of people kind of going into that field. What made you choose that? And I mean, was that the goal going into the military, working with nuclear stuff?
honestly, no, I had no idea. And I'd never even really heard of it till I talked to the recruiter. So I went and took my ASVAB, my entry test, and I scored pretty high. And I asked the recruiter, just what's the best job I can get in the Navy? And he pointed me in the direction of being a nuke. So, then I looked at it. They have the best opportunities after they get out. They have good advancement rates. It's a very valuable experience overall. Then you get to schooling, which is almost 2 years. You're paid to go to school. I'm like, man, well, instead of going to college and getting in debt, that's pretty solid option. So I just figured, this is where I'm going to be. 6 total year enlistment, guaranteed because of the extra schooling. So I'll see how it is. Joined up, and then the rest is history. And now here I am. So it's a great 6 years. Now I'm on from there. I got out in 2014. So it's been a little while. It was a transition coming back, but everything's going well.
That's brilliant. And one guy that's responsible for putting us together, Everett Osmer, shout out to Alabama. He says, Gabe. And he said, hey, thank you for your service. He didn't know that you served. So there you go. And yes, thank you for your service, good sir.
Oh, yeah. And a major thank you to Everett for setting this all up and putting us in contact. So very cool. My good friend Everett.
Yeah, man, he's awesome. He's one of my greatest friends too. So shout out to Everett. Now, obviously, I mean, in doing what you did in the military, right, in the Navy, how did you end up going into mixed martial arts? I mean, did you kind of know about it? Did you train before? Did you train during your service? I mean, how did that kind of breach itself?
So growing up, I wasn't super athletic or anything. I was kind of the big kid and, all that kind of stuff. Sophomore year was the first year I ever stepped on the mats. I joined high school wrestling. And my coach was my greatest inspiration up to my life at that point. And, I started out slow, lost a lot of matches, and I put in all the work. I worked all summer for it. I lifted at 6 a.m. before school every single day. I worked as hard as I could. By senior year, I ended up taking third in state. So combat sports kind of just built off my wrestling background and how much I loved wrestling. So that competitive drive, trying to make myself better all the time, wanting to get into more matches and competition, the natural move from there would be to go to jiu-jitsu. So when I joined the Navy, I'm in South Carolina now, my first real duty station. And I just looked up what MMA schools, jiu-jitsu schools, anything I could find. And I found a coach right down the road, and it looked like a good fit. I wanted some community outside of the military because, you're so far from home. You're 19 years old, trying to figure it all out in this new place. So that's how I started branching out and meeting more people out in town. And I fell in love with the sport of jiu-jitsu, and I've been training it off and on ever since. So that's been quite some time now. And from there, I joined, I went to Japan. I was in Yokosuka, found an MMA gym, didn't speak great Japanese, so I did what I could with it. And, mostly when I was in port, because we're out to sea all the time, we did more stand-up. So I started learning boxing. I started learning kickboxing, kind of got my feet wet into that arena. Got out of the Navy, came home. I took a couple years off, didn't really train, wasn't working for it. And, I found myself just needing it again, needing that competition and needing that community to be a part of. So I went through a few gyms until I found a place I really fit in and started training, hit it full speed, had 5 fights my first year back in training. And that's pretty much how I got here. So yeah, a bunch of stand-up kickboxing fights. I've done some jiu-jitsu tournaments. I've still done wrestling tournaments in Japan. I actually competed there wrestling. I joined the Navy base team. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at.
Wow. So, I mean, one of the cool things, because obviously, people talk about, I mean, every time of the year, obviously in a kind of time gone by pre-COVID, one of the greatest kind of rivalries in collegiate sports would be the Navy versus the Army, football games and what have you. But I mean, obviously, you hear about Golden Gloves champions coming out of boxing, out of the Navy boxing program, but I didn't even know that there was a wrestling team in the Navy. How did you first learn about that?
Well, there is a wrestling team, but I was on the bases team. I wasn't in the official Navy wrestling team. So each base is going to have different teams, be it football, wrestling, whatever it may be. So being that there was a base team, and it's for all the different ships that were on our duty station. So, I mean, we were picking up guys from all over the place, different people with backgrounds like state champ out of Georgia or me, and then a bunch of heavyweights. So we just all got together. We had a coach. He was a Japanese national. And the base hired him to teach us all. So we did freestyle wrestling there because, it's international. We're not doing the traditional collegiate we have here in the U.S. that we studied in school. So we're all doing a new style. And he would set us up with different tournaments throughout the country. There was the Japanese National Defense Force tournament we went to and a few other local regional ones in Tokyo. So a couple tournaments a year, as much as we could because we are limited by schedule and duty. But whenever we got the chance, we took a whole team up, and we even camped out at their Olympic facilities one year. We spent a couple nights there. We got special duty to leave, and I got to wrestle their Olympic heavyweight in the tournament. So we had a really great time there. We got to do some awesome things.
That's sick. That's so sick. And one of the okay, I mean, here in North America, right? Everybody, for the most part, just knows of the UFC, right? But I mean, there are promotions when you think about like Pride, Fighting Championship, UWFI, the King of Pancrase, all of these promotions, they started in Japan, and especially like Pride in the and the first UFC, they started within 2 weeks of each other. So you could really make an argument, in terms of the what we know as MMA now, and when you take away like obviously Brazil, they had shoot box and Vale Tudo, but like MMA as we kind of know it now, its origins could be split either way. You could say, hey, it's UFC here in America, and then everybody else kind of followed after, or Pride in Japan, and everybody else followed after. So that's a huge lineage of our sports history as we know it. That comes by way of Japan.
Yeah, it was truly a privilege to be able to train there in that place, knowing those things is totally awesome.
Now, I mean, switching over, I mean, obviously, because you had trained in Washington State, in high school and what have you, what was the biggest transition into that kind of folk style, Japanese style wrestling?
So my coach actually did have us do some freestyle back in high school, so I did have a little bit of a background in it. So in the off season, we would go compete at those tournaments. So I wasn't starting totally from scratch there. So a little bit of freestyle base plus Coach Noda. He also coached Takanori Gomi in Japan. So, I mean, he was a very, very prestigious coach that the Navy hired for us. And that did help my freestyle game up a lot. And I was very competitive in Japan. So, and that's a style I hadn't even really trained or been brought up in. Meanwhile, I'm going out to sea. I'm going on duty. You can't train the way you really need to for big tournaments, but still making it happen and having fun and, going out and being super competitive and winning tournaments. And yeah, it wasn't too bad. There's a few slight rule changes, but nothing that you can't get used to in a little bit of time. So
yeah, I one of my friends, right? And just to show you kind of like the differences, the subtle differences. One of my friends, he trains, and I think he's a black belt, a pretty either brown or a black belt in jiu-jitsu under the 10 planet jiu-jitsu system, right? And he was just like, I do no-gi anyway, and he signed up for Josh Barnett. He had a catch wrestling tournament that happened here, I think, last year. And when you're trying to, you're prone to kind of fighting off of your back. Well, in catch wrestling, talk about the subtle the rule changes.
Yeah.
Catch wrestling, you get pinned on your back, and you lose, and it was just like he lost the match because he got pinned on the shoulder. So those subtle rule changes can mean everything, when you think about
For
it.
sure. Yeah. We had state champs that were here in high school wrestlers, 2-time state champs, really good wrestlers. And they'd go over there and some of the Japanese guys would work them because they'd have these other little subtle differences. Like you said, locking hands on top, they wouldn't know how to get away. Then you get rolled 2-3 times, that's a tech. So then they win that round. And, that's different too. You win by round, you don't win by cumulative points. So that also trips some guys up. But yeah, the little subtle differences, they make all the difference.
Absolutely. Now, going back to your career, right? So when you took those, those 5 fights, during your service, were you doing that, in the Carolinas? Were you doing that in Japan? Where did those fights take place?
I didn't actually have any fights until after I was already out. That was all over this last year. So I was just training back then when I could in my spare time, going to wrestling tournaments or jiu-jitsu tournaments. Did some of those in New York, the Carolinas, and Japan, so all 3 of my duty stations. And then I took my years off. I didn't actually start fighting competitively until 2018. So as far as MMA and kickboxing goes,
So, I mean, obviously there was a couple-year gap in between, you moving away from your active duty service military time and then, fighting MMA in 2018, right? So what did you do to kind of fill that time in between? Were you still actively competing or?
not really. I mostly just took all those years off in between. I kind of gave it up for a bit. I was focused on my own self and my transition from active duty into the workforce, the civilian workforce. So spent some time training, getting certificates for new jobs and licenses and all that stuff. And now I'm a facilities engineer in downtown Seattle. So that took a learning curve to get used to because, we only worked on a ship and a building is its own animal. It's totally different. So learning how to operate all those systems took some time, and you figure that out and you're just adjusting and life is changing and everything's coming at you so fast. And priorities, I just didn't have fighting as my priority for a little bit. And now everything's settled. I'm feeling good shape. That's when I started moving back into, I really do miss competition. So in 2018, I kind of got that spark again. I went to a fight card one of my friends was on. I'm like, man, I have to fight. I've trained this long. I mean, off and on, but I've trained a long time and I still haven't actually done it. It's time to get in the cage and make this happen. So I was actually about 70 pounds overweight at the time, 335. I ended up dropping all that weight over the course of about 3 or 4 months, made it down to heavyweight, 265 was the limit, and then signed up, got in my first fight and been training hard since.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, your friend that took that fight, I mean, is that the gym that you ended up training at to kind of further your career, or did you, do something different?
Not really. That friend was actually out of state. He was in the Navy with me, and he'd also been training off and on for a long time, but he wanted to try it out and step in, and I told him I know some people. Maybe I can get you in on an amateur card out here. And then it's just worked out. The owner of that promotion, Travis Dorge, it's Redemption Cage Fights, so it's a great promotion. He also owns and runs a gym, 6 Feet Under MMA. And while Adam was here to train, his name's Adam too. He did a fight camp for about 5 weeks. He took vacation from his job and flew out to Washington. And I started training with him there with Travis with 6 Feet Under. And it totally felt like home. All the guys there, great teammates, great partners. And I realized that's where I needed to be. So I officially joined that gym at that point. And then he had his fight. He went back to Missouri, and I stuck with it. So I stayed with 6 Feet Under for the next year. And that's where I was, Travis and them, great team. But yeah, so.
That's brilliant. And I just think it's I kind of hilarious, right? Where you did have these connections that you were able to get your friend from out of state a fight, but it hadn't really kind of clicked over in your head that, hey, I should fight, until you saw him do exactly that, the very thing that you helped put together, the very thing that you helped cultivate, and then you're like, bam, like the green light went
Exactly.
on, and you're like,
Why am I
yeah.
wasting my time? Why am I not in there? I want to be in there. I've just been putting it off for too long, or lazy, or whatever it may have been. So then I threw all of that out the window and went for it. So
Now that you're in, right, and obviously, this kind of situation has kind of thrown everybody in a loop one way or another. But in terms of like what the Pacific Northwest fight scene and up in the area where you are, um, I mean, how big is that scene? I was just talking with Tyson Duckford, the other day, and it turns out that out in Alaska, because he's the current Alaskan fighting featherweight champion, and there's actually 5 promotions there in Alaska, and I was just like, oh my gosh, Alaska has a fight team? Like, that's crazy. It has a fight scene? That's
yeah,
amazing. And again, combat sports happens everywhere, and doesn't matter where you train, big gym like a Jackson Wink in New Mexico, or 6 feet under, or what have you. Great fighters come from everywhere, every walk of life. So what's the scene like over there?
it's actually really good. It's huge. There's gyms everywhere. There's always fight cards going on. Every few weekends, you got a promoter putting something on. You might have to travel a little bit. Right now with COVID, we have no fights going on in Washington. It's all been stopped. I guess there's some in Idaho, so some fighters are able to go out there and get work in, but we can't have camps. We can't have the gyms open. So that's a bit challenging. You can make it happen on your own, training, doing a weight room. I've had friends come over. We've sparred in my backyard. We've sparred out in the cul-de-sac. So we're still training where we can and what we can, but to do a full fight camp is tough right now. But outside of that, Pacific Northwest, we have great talent. We have great fighters all the way from the top to the bottom, pro and amateur. Everyone's a community. We all work together when we don't fight each other. We'll do some training with one another. It's a good atmosphere. The whole aura here is excellent. So,
And the atmosphere, that's the thing that, I mean, really gets lost, and it's one thing that us in the fight community miss the most is, the scene, to be able to be comfortable. I mean, literally, you're putting your life on the line every time you sign the contract on the dotted line, to go in and fight. And then, some of your greatest friends are the people that, I mean, literally administered the most damage to you, nowhere
for
else in the
sure.
world, no other occupation in the world, and you've done quite a few of them. Can you have that?
Yeah, I fought one guy for a title last year, midsummer, and ever since then, him and I have become great friends. He comes over and trains with me sometimes. It is cool how that works. So most of the guys I've all fought, I still talk to, and some of my friends that I'm supposed to fight in the future, we still have a good time. And yeah, it is really cool. So
Yeah, it's the camaraderie, and also the coaches. You talked about your time at 6 feet under, and it really feeling right. And a lot of people, kind of, I don't, they don't, I don't feel like it gets appreciated. The kind of student mentorship that happens between a coach and his fighters. And the coach is essentially the one that is leading you into battle,
yeah,
and you have to be absolutely trustful in his word, you know, in what you're about to accomplish, and you have to have that trust. So, I mean, finding that camaraderie there at 6 feet under, that had to be so great.
it was, and I did grow a lot there. I've recently had a schedule change at work, so I'm not able to go there anymore. Now I'm with Ivan Salavari MMA, which is one of the best schools in the Northwest, and those are a bunch of great guys too. But yeah, so the coaches make a huge role in deciding where you're going to be a team at. You have to really take that into consideration because you're right. They are leading you into battle and helping you grow and develop your craft and become a better fighter and better person in all ways. So Then
Yeah, absolutely,
we're
absolutely.
heavyweights.
Now,
So heavyweights are sometimes a little hard to find, for big, talented, athletic sparring partners. So that's another thing you got to take in consideration. Like, where am I going to train? Who's going to be there to train with? So, yeah.
no, absolutely. You're uh, that's funny because I mean, as you move up in weight, obviously the power goes up, right? And the margin of error, becomes either wider or shorter, and you can have somebody that can, I mean, literally is built like a steam engine and hits like a truck, but that might not be the perfect sparring partner, especially if you've got a fight coming up, because again, if you get injured, you can't fight.
Sometimes that could be a factor, or if you're looking for a certain style you want to train for, because this guy's got a background in jiu-jitsu or wrestling or Muay Thai. So then you'll need to find specific guys to kind of mirror that and, just get a little more used to it. So that's all stuff you got to worry about, and all back to which gym you're going to join. So.
Absolutely. And over on YouTube, Disney Eve says, as in great fighters, I think you're a good fighter. So thank you, Disney. And I believe that might be Everett chiming in on YouTube as well. So thank you for both joining us on Facebook and YouTube, Everett. But it's in terms of development, right? Obviously, the age of the heavyweight, those slow and lumbering heavyweights, like I mean, some that come to mind is like I remember when I first started getting into Bellator, like around 2012. There was like Ron Print. I think it was like Eric Sparks and Ron Prindle, and they were just jacked to the gills. And I mean, the best round was the best round of the fight, because if it went anything beyond that, it was not the greatest thing, right? But with that all being said, were there heavyweights that have influenced your style? Whether that be you're learning jujitsu like a Frank Mir, or just knockout power like Francis Ngannou. Like, who are some of the guys that inspire you?
Coming up from a wrestling background, I always root for the other wrestlers. So when I watch DC, Daniel Cormier or Stipe Miocic, those are the guys that I'm most looking at and trying to emulate. And, it works. It works for them. So that's kind of where I want to push my game too. And I want to stick with that base. I want to be a wrestler that can fight. So those are who I get my heavyweight inspirations from. And even back then when I was in school, it was like Forrest Griffin. That was my favorite fighter. So, those were the guys that kind of got me looking at where I wanted to be and how I wanted to get there. Randy Couture and George St. Pierre, and those are the ones. So, yeah.
No, for sure. And I love that you brought up Daniel Cormier, because everybody, they only know what they know, right? And they just have followed his UFC career, as it's been now. And I mean, a hell of a career that he's had. Light heavyweight champion, heavyweight champion at the same time, UFC commentator. But I mean, for me, I remember watching him on Strikeforce, right? And him and Ronda Rousey were on the Strikeforce Challenger Series. They weren't even on the main card. They were just like on the Challenger Series. And man, just seeing his kind of rise. And I think he took 2 fights, and then he got entered into and won them both, and then got entered into the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix. And when I mean, again, I'm a catch wrestling guy, and one of my favorite fighters is somebody who originally came from the state of Washington, none other than the War Master Josh Barnett.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And right, yeah. And when Cormier, who is, I mean, noticeably shorter than Barnett, and Barnett being an avid catch can wrestler under Billy Robinson and Antonio Inoki and Sakuraba, and he basically picks Barnett up and chucks him, like, and I was just like, what is going on here? And I knew at that moment it was like DC was, I mean, head and shoulders above the rest, and I mean, he ended up winning that tournament, and yeah, man, a lot of people forget the great things that DC has done in a relatively short career. Within 10 years, he's been able to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah, no, and I'm a big fan of DC other ways too. He's a high school wrestling coach still, so he's given back to his community and his craft that he came from. I think that's really cool to be able to do that on the side. So, yeah, it's an awesome career, and I like following DC. He's one of my favorite fighters. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Although for me, there was a time that I had kind of a weird relationship with him in terms of my fandom because like uh, those matches were with John Jones. You know, they weren't the best examples of what his of what he can do in the cage, right? But he basically, was talking like he was a world beater and all that stuff. But you can't really say that when John Jones is kind of lurking in the shadows, right? So when he kind of talked himself up, I was just like, I mean, just do what you do. You
play to
don't
who
have to.
you are. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. But again, in terms of, opening opportunities, like you said, he, I gosh, where is he in? I think it's like, not UC Davis. It's somewhere in the Central California deal, but he's a high school wrestling coach and has the Daniel Cormier Academy where, he basically gives scholarships to kids who can't afford it and gets them ready, so he's ushering this whole new wave of,
yeah.
like wrestling prowess, and wherever they may go. It could be a Jordan Burroughs, it could be, the next DC for all we know, but he's planting those seeds now.
And that's so admirable. That's one of the reasons that, I'll for life be a DC fan, knowing that stuff.
Absolutely. So, I mean, right now, obviously, we're in this kind of COVID situation, but, obviously, I mean, right now, if you're a combat sports fan, this is the weekend for you because, I mean, we've got LFA tonight, we've got Bellator tonight, we've got bare knuckle live and free on YouTube and Fight TV, and then the UFC tomorrow, right? How do you assess of what the promotions have done that have been running in terms of like their response to the COVID stuff and the quality of fights? Are there any fights that you've watched in this kind of 3-month period that kind of speak out to you?
I've kind of followed it a little bit, just watching some fights, but I've been more focused on other things during this whole shutdown. So I'm training myself, but not so much watching what's going on that end. But I'm happy they're doing what they can, and I love it to keep the sport moving. So I'm very thankful there. But no, as far as watching it myself, I haven't really been into that. I actually have a kid on the way, so that'll be here in November. So that's been a lot of my focus, and me and my girlfriend getting ready for that coming, and my stepdaughter. So that's what we're working with more of.
Oh, congratulations, good sir.
No,
I
thank
mean,
you.
yeah, it's. I mean, that's a whole life altering thing that's about to happen. So I totally agree with you. Kind of, the fighting stuff. The constant evolution of self is kind of what's important, and then
Yes,
the fight stuff will come.
it'll come. And with this Corona going on, I mean, it's the perfect time. So get the
Absolutely.
going, and then when it's all Corona's over, it'll be time to hit the gyms again and keep working and get to the next level. So
That's sick. That's sick. So, I mean, in terms of things that are coming up, right? Because obviously we're in this kind of weird situation. Is there a perceivable kind of start or inclination that you guys are getting when things might be opening back up?
it's so hard to say, especially in Washington. Things are looking good, looking like we're going to open, and then the governor will come out and say, hey, we're rolling it back a little bit. So to really know where or when this is all going to blow over is so hard. I can't even give a prediction. I'm hoping as soon as possible because I do want to get back in there and start going full speed. I want to have fights come back locally, and I want to be able to compete. So the sooner the better, but no, I have no idea when. I'm just hoping for it.
Absolutely. Jesse Velasquez kind of mentioned, and shout out to Jesse, but he's like DC and Jones. He's got his picks. And again, the only person thus far that's been able to beat John Jones is John Jones. I personally, he's it's oil and water with me and him because of the antics that he has outside of the cage or whatever. But you can't deny his talent.
That's for sure. Super talented. But yeah, you're right. Dominic Reyes was pretty close. But yeah, no. DC or Jones so far, you're right. The only one that can beat himself.
Yeah, yeah. And then Disney Eve on YouTube says, so Gabe, would you pick DC or Stipe when they eventually face each other?
That's a tough one. I love them both. They're both great fighters. I think DC's going to have the edge this time. I think he's going to go out with a bang and get the strap back. But I don't think it's going to be easy, and it could go either way. I mean, I can't tell you, but I think DC will edge it.
Yeah, and it's so cool because it's a rubber match, and both of them knockouts, and when you look at the amount of people that they've accumulatively defeated, it's just like it's the who's who of the heavyweight division.
Yeah, no, it's two of the best heavyweights to ever do it. Seriously, yeah.
Yeah, what's weird about Stipe, right? What's cool about Stipe is, regardless of his rate and the injuries or whatever, but he's maintained his career as a firefighter this whole time in Cleveland. Like, that's so crazy to me.
Yes, and that's awesome too. And I understand trying to train and have fight camps and work full time. Like, it's rough. So hats off to him. Like that is super cool. He can manage all that.
Absolutely. And but it's a weird one because before the last fight that he had against DC where he took the title back, it was almost like him, Tony Ferguson and Max Holloway were kind of like, oh, I don't, because it seemed like, especially in their speech patterns, it looked like there might be some TE there. They weren't as sharp as they once were in terms of the verbiage. So I was just like, red flag, like this might not be good. And all three of them, right after Max Holloway's horrible weight cut, Tony Ferguson's emotional and mental strife and the injury that pulled out of the last Khabib fight, and obviously Stipe, they've all turned out the best performances of their career. And they're mumbling the whole way through.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's just like, what makes that that intangible factor, right? That intangible factor. What makes people different? What makes people special? Those three, and Stipe, obviously heavyweight champion of the world in the UFC. I mean, he's got that intangible quality that you just can't teach.
For sure. Yeah. That's something we all got to strive for to get ourselves and develop it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just like the idea of, like, again, being a pro wrestling fan, and one of the greatest, collegiate wrestlers to ever grace the squared circle, so to speak, was Vern Gagne of Minnesota. And Vern Gagne essentially, on his retirement match, he retired with the title, and I think DC might just very well do the same.
I think that's the idea, yeah, and I think he's going to push to make that happen.
Absolutely. Now, Jesse Velasquez is chiming in and he says, I agree, but DC has to wrestle this time. Two goats in the heavyweight division, but it's hard to choose.
So hard to choose. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I really don't know, but I'm excited. And we're all blessed to be able to watch it 3 times, I expect. So lucky for us.
Yeah, lucky for us. We're the fortunate ones, And Jesse, again, he's like, and hell's yeah, working full-time, training, competing is a struggle sometimes, and he respects that. Absolutely. That's something that you do. That's something that Jesse, who's a IFS champion here in SoCal, it's just, a a lot of people will see like the Bellators and the UFC and the bare knuckle and just think like, oh, these guys have millions of dollars, because that's kind of what we've been conditioned to in terms of, high level athletes being paid, right? And most people don't know. And even if you have a contract with the UFC or Bellator, only like the top 1% make
For
those
sure.
multi-million-dollar deals.
Some of us are out here working 40, 50, 60-hour weeks, even more, and we're still fighting. I have a few pro friends, pro fighters. Same thing. They make all their money actually working. As very little comes when you're working your way up the pro ranks. So, yeah, that's the reality most fighters have to face. It's not just
Absolutely.
all the time and freedom to do it as much or as little as you want. Like, it's tough schedules. It's whatever they can permit. So,
Absolutely. Now, in terms of when you last fought, when was the time frame of when you last fought?
I fought in November last year. So that's been my most recent one. It was Northwest Fight Challenge in Tacoma. So that was my last MMA fight. I did have a submission grappling match after that around Christmas. So this year, nothing yet. I was supposed to fight in May. That got canceled because of everything going on. I was hoping to go pro by the end of this year, but it doesn't look like that's going to be able to happen with all this hang up in training and hang up in fighting. So might push it off one more year. I'm 30 right now, so I gotta go. It's time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what kind of obviously, brings up those, like we kind of alluded to earlier, the ascension to, promotions on, the regional scene and, the worldwide stage, like a UFC or Bellator, one championship and what have you. You kind of have to make that switch, from amateur to pro.
Yeah. We've had some great regional promotions here with Cage Sport, and there is good pro scene here too. So a lot of guys start there and then they work their way up, win a few Cage Sport fights, win a title, and then you're getting called up to Bellator. One of my last teammates got that. So yeah, it's a good launching pad here. Like I said, the Northwest just has a great fight community, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, it absolutely sounds like it. And especially with, wrestling so ingrained. I mean, unfortunately, like here in Southern California, we didn't get too much of that. It was just like, oh, I mean, literally, I had signed up for the wrestling team, made the team, and a week later they cut the program, So it was just like, so obviously, with as many wrestlers as the Pacific Northwest turns out, it's kind of fitting the fact that you guys have a great fight scene up there.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got good high school programs all the way up. We have good kids programs, and that's really where you make them, starting out in the youth, and that's how we get where we're at.
That's sick. Now, in terms of your future career, and I think we alluded to it a little bit, but in terms of taking the fight in November, hopefully the fight in May, but that got canceled, right?
Yep. Just whenever we can start training full speed and when the promotions open back up, I want to do a couple more amateur fights first, and depending on how everything goes, then I want to take the leap and move up to the next level. So that's kind of where I'm at, and that's my plan. So just going to keep training and push myself to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of crazy too, because, of course we want some semblance of normalcy, right? But obviously we want it to happen in a safe confines. But it's kind of weird. And we saw it in instances when the UFC, got out of Florida and then started holding fights at the Apex Center in Vegas, where a lot of fighters, because of the, yes, you can have fights in the UFC and you have a contract and what have you, but how can you really prepare for a fight camp when your gym is not open? And a lot of people, that usually have, their cardio machines ended up kind of gassing out, in the first or second round because they just didn't have that fight camp or fight environment to kind of raise them up.
For sure. And, we can train as much as we can, but being in a true fight camp is that next level of training, which we're kind of missing if the gyms aren't open. And that's tough to simulate on your own, So until we get that, it's going to be that way for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you were saying, in terms of garnering your training to your opponent, for an upcoming fight, right? That in itself is a major adjustment, right? Let alone, we're not even trying to find, a particular fighter to fight that style. You're just trying to find bodies to train with, It's like,
yeah,
and do
exactly.
you have a COVID? Like,
We even had it in my house not long ago. My housemate caught it, so it's been a crazy time. Then we had to totally quarantine for a few weeks. He was supposed to have a pro boxing fight in August, but he got sick, so he couldn't do that. And it is pretty tough to try to do this home training right now. And yeah, it's kind of it's crazy.
Yeah, well, it's crazy. So in doing these, you kind of shine a light to like what's going on in particular, parts of the country, parts of the world. There's friends in Taiwan, and there was just like everything, was completely shut down from January to April or May, and then now we're kind of back to normal or whatever. But then like here in Alabama, they're going to actually have the first professional boxing fight, mandated by the State Athletic Commission in Alabama on August 22nd, called Rumble in Rainville. So it's just like stuff are happening, here and there. Shamrock FC was supposed to have a fight card, but that also got scrapped because of the commission, and it's just like we're trying to figure out like who's doing what and what we can allow. Obviously, regardless of what happens, right? The first iteration of fights coming out of this is obviously going to be no fans, and it's just like what promoter can really shell out, money for live streams or whatever, and testing for fighters and just kind of crazy stuff, and then you essentially can't have fans. So there's a major part of your revenue that you don't have, and you're supposed to do all of these precautions,
So that makes it even more difficult on the promoters and makes it harder to have fights scheduled to begin with. So it's a multi-level issue that's going on. So just hoping for the best. I hope sooner rather than later we get a train and open and everything goes back to some sense of normalcy if we can. And that's my hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Wednesday of this week. It was actually kind of announced that here in California that we're essentially, in August, they were going to have a Golden Boy boxing event, and depending on how that went, that would kind of be the precursor of whatever happens. But again, as we've kind of found out in the last 3-4 months, everything could change in an instant, in an hour-to-hour basis, and again, it's people's safety. Why have fights or people to referee, judge, put them together, and then everybody is susceptible to some craziness,
Yeah, no, it's understandable where we're at, but fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, yeah. And in terms of, I heard a number floated around here in California just for testing alone, right? Testing alone, COVID testing alone, $40,000.
Wow. Yeah.
$40,000, right? And then that's not including insurance for the fighters, right? When you have, just you're looking at one fight on the card, right? You've got 2 corners and a fighter each side, right? So that's 6 people plus a referee.
That
and
you
3
have
judges
to travel and you have to house.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's tough. And then when you don't have a crowd, it's crazy. I'm so thankful that some people are making it happen still.
Yeah, it's everybody's looking to be the canary in the coal mine because I mean, obviously, you know, again, there's going to be some huge windfalls, that happen with everybody, but it's just like, somebody's kind of crawl out and figure this thing out, and again, what Dana White and the UFC are doing, what Scott Coker is doing tonight with Bellator, we're kind of starting to see things open up. Baseball started again, and so it's just like there's some semblances of hope, but it's just like everybody's kind of chomping at the bit to like what the next thing will be.
Yeah, I know, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to wait and see. But in terms of obviously, should this fight had happened in May, and you were able to turn pro, I mean, how was the year or like the 2 year plan of
Personal life too. I ride motorcycles on the free time. There's lots of possibilities, but you can only plan for what you can, what your goals are and your expectations, but you can't make it hard. I know this is methodically going to happen this way. But no, my plan was just to have a couple more amateur fights, that one in May, maybe another one in the summer, and then go pro soon after that was the idea. If training was going well, if injuries weren't happening. I'm 30, injuries are happening a little more now than they used to when I was younger. So all those little things you got to work around. But that was my idea. Now I'm just pushing it off probably about 6 months, but I'm hoping everything kicks right back up where it left off. And I've been training as hard as I can on the off. I'm lifting, running, doing all the things you can on your own and having guys over. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm working for what I can, doing what I have that I can work with.
That's it, making the most of every opportunity, and that's the kind of ethos. Everybody's trying to do that, and it's glad. I'm so glad that you're able to make headway in your life and keep yourself motivated during this time because that's kind of what we need. This kind of indomitable strength that we have to develop to kind of get over whatever hurdles that may appear in our lives.
For sure. Yep.
Now, let's get some shout outs out of the way because obviously, every one person is as good as the village that essentially raised them. So there's a lot of people that have gotten you here today. So let's shout them out, my man.
Well, my coach, Kyle Weekly, back in wrestling, he got me started on this whole journey. So that would be one to thank. Eddie Fivey, he runs a jiu-jitsu program in New York I trained with. Then Travis, like I said, was 6 feet under, helped me develop incredibly over the last year and get me to where I am. Now I'm with Ivan Saliveri, and I'm going to try to work up to that next level there, training with my new schedule that's going to be a little more permissible. Everett, of course, for getting me this interview. And then some of our sponsors, Jeremy with Family Tradition Tattoo down in Puyallup. He's done some of my ink and a few other fighters. He's a great tattoo artist. Then John Opegard with Opegard Meadery. He's been sponsoring our fights. And JC Nelson with Nelson Family Dentistry and P&D Logging. A lot of the fighters actually work for P&D, and he's been a big part of putting the fights on and a member of the 6 feet under family. So, yeah, those are some of my shout outs. My girlfriend, Stephanie, she was a pro fighter. She's helped get me in contact with other people. So, it's all going really well with that. Like you said, it takes everyone to build us up. And I have a great community around me to help me do that.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Now, for those who haven't already joined your fight community, good sir, where can they find you on social media?
Gabe_Wishon on Instagram, or just search me up on Facebook. I'll add anyone as a friend, and reach out to me if you're local in the area. We can train. I'll point you in the right direction, anywhere you want to go. Anytime I have fights, hopefully within the next year, I mean, God willing, with the COVID, come watch. I'll be posting it on Instagram and Facebook. So that's pretty much where I'm at. And you could find me either of those places.
Man, I can't wait. I can't wait. And I'm so honored to be a part of your fight community, and I'm honored that you're a part of mine. But
Yeah, I'm
uh,
honored to be on your show. Thank you so much. So,
no problem, no problem, dude. Anytime, anytime. And Adrian Cleveland says, "Proud of you, Gabe."
oh,
Bam.
that's my big
See,
sister. Thanks, Adrian.
see, just
Yeah.
feeling the love, feeling the love. But
Yep.
dude, thank you again for joining us here. Thank you guys for joining us live, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And this has been According to Woods with Gabe Wishon, and we are out. Thank you guys.
Thank you.